Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman. I want to welcome you to a very special edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit-Down. That's right, folks. We continue our journey chilling in the comic book corner as we continue on our run through 18 Marvel films in the lead up to Avengers Infinity War, something I like to call the Seaman's Infinity War Countdown. I just dropped a video that should have landed on Thursday, which would have been would have landed on Wednesday, which would have been 9 days out from Avengers Infinity War. Today, Thursday, is 8 days out. Don't get on me because technically, if you're getting this right when I release it, yes, it's Friday. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I had a very long day, took a much longer nap than anticipated after work. We're a little behind, but I still am going to bring you stuff in my day. It's still my Thursday. So we're now 8 days out. We're up to number 11 on our countdown. You know the drill, folks. Pull up a chair, take a seat. I'm sure you can guess where I'm going. We're talking Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Little bit different structure with this video. I'm not going to do good and bad. I'm just going to talk about this movie. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do these movies back to back, because you watch them back to back. Chronologically, we had to slide Volume 2 up, because it takes place right after Volume 1. And the reasoning behind that, genius. This guy right here. Baby Groot is too adorable. The concept of Baby Groot is executed so well. This movie needed to be right after the first one, so you could capitalize on this cute little creature. And thank God they did, because Baby Groot is a gem in this one. But, like any sequel, some trilogies, the number 2 is always better than number 1. Occasionally, number 1 is so unique, and out of nowhere, it's impossible to replicate. That's what happened with Guardians. That's what happened with The Hangover. I'm going to use that as a nice comparison, because when The Hangover 2 dropped, very similar to Guardians Volume 2, it's not necessarily building off of anything. It kind of just tried to remake one, which is why this movie is a better executed sequel in the sense that Gunn's not trying to improve. Or no, he is trying to improve. He's not trying to do better than the first one, but he's trying to build off what's established and improve on things. And he does that really well in this movie. Yeah, there's a couple things that are, hold it back from being better than the first one. Things with Ego, kind of strange that, for a living planet, he decides to, conceptually it makes sense. On a living planet, we get a shot from a wide shot where we can see his face, which is a wonderful thing as a comic book fan to visibly see Ego, the living planet. But the conceptualization of making him a human makes a ton of sense, right? Lots of things in comic books don't translate, i.e. in DC, Harley Quinn, her costume, if you put that on a human, doesn't look right. Well, if you had Ego, the living planet, being a living planet for a whole movie, not going to really work well. So the idea to use Kurt Russell as a physical form makes a ton of sense. The reasoning as to why he takes that physical form doesn't make as much sense. Ego's out in the middle of nowhere. He starts as a brain and slowly realizes that he can control some stuff, and he creates a planet that is him. But he wants to expand. He wants to find that he's not the only thing out there. He wants purpose, and to do that, he needs to travel. So he creates a smaller version of himself that can leave the planet. It just has to come back or he'll die. And he chooses the form of a human, which is strange because he doesn't know what a human looks like. So stuff like that can kind of hinder this movie sometimes. But in reality, it's just a great carry-on. You really should watch Volumes 1 and 2 back to back, because it just takes what we get in Volume 2 and excels. They do things in this movie better than Volume 1 in certain areas. And it's just because it's a natural growth off of what we learned in 1. So, let's just talk about this film. And again, starts with James Gunn, brilliant. Love that again, we're running off of, Awesome Mix Volume 2. And we're moving along with just the soundtrack that is the baseline of the movie. Works again so wonderfully. The structure of the movie, the action sequences, the cuts, the color palette, everything that we did in Volume 1 is back in Volume 2, and we're just trying to improve on certain aspects. The biggest thing, and the thing I think that's great about this movie, is family. That is what this movie is about. This one in particular, even more so than 1, right? 1 kind of established this family stuff, how the Guardians finding each other. Now they kind of were all orphans in the world. Now they have a family. That just builds in this movie. We build on the Guardians family relationship. We get to see all of them getting tighter. I love how they play off each other in the movie, and how all their relationships from Volume 1 to Volume 2 have just grown. The interactions between Groot and Drax just continue to be awesome. Little baby plant Groot dancing in the mid-credit sequence in Volume 1 stops every time Drax looks over at him. Now, baby Groot, with full working limbs, and legs. He has arms at the end of Volume 1. Same thing, he loves to dance, and he's dancing, and every once in a while Drax will look, and he'll freeze. Drax looks away, and Drax goes right back, he freezes. So stuff like that, Gamora and Quill's relationship, wonderful. Building off of similar things from Volume 1, right? Volume 1, you got that dance sequence. You get another sequence where Quill tries to get her to dance, even after Drax told her that she's not a dancer. And they mention this unspoken thing. It starts with Quill, and it comes back around where she, at the end, finally acknowledges, yes, there is this unspoken thing between us. And it's beautiful. It's so natural to watch, and I love watching their relationship grow, and the way they push each other, right? When you're talking family, once they find out that Ego, who comes in to save the day at one point, and only Rocket kind of notices that, Ego shows up, and Quill's not sure if he's buying everything that he's selling. And Gamora kind of pushes him. It's like, look, this guy could be your dad. Like, you should go chase that. Like, my dad is Thanos, and he's a horrible person. But if you have a chance to, find your dad, I know what that would mean, because I don't have a relationship with mine. And Thanos isn't her real dad. In the comics and whatnot, he acquires Nebula and Gamora from planets that he's taking over, and, that's why they're his family. So she knows what it's like to not know who her real dad is. But then once they get there, she can tell something's off with Ego, just as the way the audience can, and she starts to retract and is like, Quill, I don't know if this is all right. And they have this really interesting moment where Quill is like, you're the one that pushed me here. You said to come here. He's my father. He's my I finally found my family. And Gamora's like, I thought you already had. And you're just like, oh, that's so good, because the Guardians are his family. They're all of each other's family. And by the end of the movie, that's just solidified even better. So their relationship on screen just continues to bloom. I love Yondu and Quill. That relationship, right, established as a very almost negative kind of combative relationship in Volume 1 until the end, when Yondu realizes that Quill pulled one over on him. And when he opens up the sphere to see the Infinity Stone, lo and behold, it's a troll. The little action figures, the troll action figures I grew up with, so not everyone is aware of those, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And he just kind of smiles. So you get that Yondu does have this love for Quill, but you don't really understand it. And you build on that in this movie. You get to learn that the reason he took Quill was because Ego hired him to bring back any one of his spawn, because he's looking for someone who has the sentient, immortal being genes. Quill happens to be the only one. And when Yondu finally figures out what Ego is doing with these kids, that's why he keeps Quill. And there's a moment in this movie that we'll talk about in more detail. That's the emotional baseline of the movie. And, Yondu just says to him, he might have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy. And they just grow their relationship. And they grow the character of Yondu so well in this movie that by the end of it, you're in love with Yondu. And like everything that Michael Rooker is doing. He is just brilliant in this role. And you just really get to establish that Quill-Yondu relationship and find out everything that there was about it, and it's just beautiful. I love Yondu and Rocket. They kind of separate the Guardians a little bit. Rocket and Groot are off doing their own thing, while Gamora, Drax, and Star-Lord are, hanging out with Ego. And the relationship between Yondu and Rocket is great because they're the same person. And that happens. They have this semi-argument before they get going, where Rocket says something to kind of just be a jerk, and Yondu's like, don't try to pull that with me, because I know who you are. I know you get angry and you act like a jerk to push everybody away so that you can't get close to anyone. And Rocket immediately gets defensive and kind of hurt, and then, Yondu's like, because you're me. I know who you are because you are me. And that just creates this awesome bond between them, and their relationship is great. Tons of humor. They play off each other so well. Bradley Cooper, his voice, but Cooper and Rooker, just very, very good conversationally in this movie. Love their relationship. Also love Quill and Ego. I love that, like I said, maybe odd that the reasoning to how Ego becomes like the Kurt Russell form of Ego. But I love their relationship, right? You get this moment where like Quill mentions that he never got to have a catch as a kid with his dad. When, we know that he, obviously from one, because he doesn't die when he grabs the Infinity Stone, he has this gene. And when, Ego's trying to show him how to utilize that power of the planet, he hits a baseball and has this nice little catch. But then as things start to get weirder and weirder, and the turn happens, it's an emotional gut check, and the responses are the way they should be. Ego's kind of brainwashed Quill in some manner, and Quill's just like, yeah, I'm gonna do whatever you need me to do. And basically he just needs to harness the energy. He needs to double his power in order to, Ego plants all these little plants on all these different planets. And the reason he had Yondu picking up kids was he was trying to find someone with his genes that he could use as a battery to power himself to take over the entire universe. And I really do genuinely think he wanted to do it with Quill. But it's, he's talking about his mom. He's like, well, what about my mom? Why'd you leave her? He's like, look, I loved your mom. I couldn't come back to an Earth where she didn't exist. And Quill's like, yeah, I know. I lived that. I watched her die. And he's like, yeah, man, it killed me to put a tumor in her head. And that snaps Quill out of it. And then I just love it. When he's in it, his eyes look like the galaxy. That wipes away. His eyes come up and he just pulls his guns and just starts shooting. Now, obviously, it's not going to kill Ego because that's just a form of Ego. It's Ego. In order to take Ego out, you actually have to attack the actual brain that's at the center of the planet. But I love that natural reaction. And Kurt Russell and Chris Pratt play off each other so well. I love their whole relationship and the up and downs. And it creates a good flow to the good and the bad of the movie. And I don't mean like bad and bad, but like, good guys, bad guys. That establishing and that switch, which they love to do with their villains, executed really well here. I also love that Drax gets to talk about his family. I love Drax in general because that's kind of, that burden is off him a little bit because they took out Ronan. Yes, he still has to go track down Thanos, but he can kind of be at peace a little bit more because he's gotten some of his revenge. And because of that, he has this really awesome relationship with Mantis, where he talks about his family, and he, it hits him first, and then he's okay with it. And that's visualized so well when Mantis has the power to absorb a person's feelings by touching them. She touches Drax and immediately starts sobbing and slowly kind of calms down and comes to a peaceful side. And you don't visibly see Drax cry. He just kind of looks one thing. And it's a great way to kind of visualize that. And I love their relationship. He's constantly telling her that she's ugly because she's not his type. But deep down, and he mentions this, he's like, you are beautiful. Only on the inside, but you are beautiful. And they just have a really cute, just kind of interactions every time they're on screen together. And I love that building. And like I said, it's just the general family story that gets told in this movie. It's wonderful, and it really creates some emotional heartbeats. I love the creativeness that Gunn has with the characters, right? Like I said, talking about Ego, even though some things might not make total sense, the conceptualization of Ego is wonderful. Getting to see the face, like I said, in the planet, so cool. I love Mantis in this movie. She looks awesome. The way she can touch and get feelings creates these really nice emotional sequences, like with Drax. But then, like, the first time she does it, it's with Quill, and she's like, I can feel love. And Quill's like, yeah, I guess, like, I got, like, a general love thing going on for everybody. She's like, no, like, romantic love, like, sexual love for this one, and points at Gamora. And Drax bursts out laughing, because he's like, ha, 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 she just said your deepest, darkest secret, ha, 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 ha. So Mantis just is able to create all these unique situations because of what she is. And she plays a major role at the end because the reason Ego kind of stole her from wherever she was from and took her in is because of that power. She can make him sleep, and he has trouble sleeping, being a living planet. So she can touch him and put him to sleep, and that plays a huge role in the finale where she kind of is stalling so that the Guardians can pull some stuff off. So love Mantis, who is played by Pom Clementif. Just wonderful. Such a great add to this group. I also love The way we've built the Ravagers. I love getting the full Yondu story that we talked about. Love finding out who the Ravagers were. Sly Stallone cameo appearance as the leader of the Ravagers, Dakar. I love the interactions they have with Yondu. It's very violent, and not violent, but very angry, and like, no, we can't come to a resolution. They meet in like a Vegas type planet, and I just love that expansion of that story, getting all of that, and it's a great tip, kind of nod of the cap. Again, James Gunn really good with this stuff. Didn't mention this, but Volume 1, Howard the Duck shows up. Just tons of Easter eggs, and this one is a really nice one because this Ravager group is the original Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's cool to kind of see that, and then see Yondu earn his redemption and have all the Ravagers come up and pay tribute to him at the end. Just wonderful. The Sovereign, which is where we start in this movie, so cool. I love their look. They're all golden. Elizabeth Debicki, who worked with Tom Hiddleston, also in the Marvel Universe, on The Night Manager. If you've seen that, love her. She plays the leader of the Sovereign, Aisha. Awesome. Like, just the regal, arrogant attitude that they have, especially her, is really cool. Like I said, they're all golden, so their look is really neat. I love that their fleet is controlled remotely. So you can blow up all these ships, but you're not really killing anyone because no one's in them. And they use these things that kind of look like arcade machines. It looks like something you would see in an arcade if you had like futuristically stuff from an arcade, and they approach it that way. It kind of is like a game to them. Anytime someone's ship blows up, their thing goes red, and they move and they start watching everybody else, to the point that the first time they show up, we get down to one guy and everybody's watching, the ship blows up, and they're like, you loser. So I just love the Sovereign. I love that the mid-credit sequence with the Sovereign involves a birthing pod, and Aisha mentions that what is going to come out of there will be the greatest thing that they can use to defeat the Guardians, and she'll name it Adam, clearly hinting at Adam Warlock. Don't know if he'll show up in Avengers 4, or if the first time we see him is Guardians of the Galaxy 3. But I love all of that stuff, and just the world that Gunn is playing, and he's playing in all the right places. I love the interactions with the Sovereign, right? They contract the Guardians to go get all these batteries and not let them get destroyed because they're super, super volatile. They bring the batteries back, and Rocket snags a couple of them, and there's just this really awesome stuff that Rocket's got going on where he's like, hey, like, I'll say something, hint, hint, wink, wink, and he keeps winking with the wrong side of his face so that everyone sees it. Like, first it's Quill, he's like, I can see you winking. And then he, like, says something about, like, the Sovereign, like, and he goes, he winks at, and they can see it, and it's just like the way they react, they're so arrogant that when they find out that Rocket has stolen a couple of the batteries to sell, because he's a thief, it's like nuclear war. Like, you don't treat us this way, and they're constantly chasing them the whole movie, and clearly, as Aisha says, she's going to use Adam Warlock to get to the Guardians. We're going to get to go back to the Sovereign, which is really cool. So yeah, like I said, I just love the additions that you get in this movie and the creativeness to those additions. Whereas like the guys we already know, they're established, they're playing into all the things that were built in Volume 1 with what their characters are, only we're building on it. And it's a really wonderful build. The action in this movie, again, so much fun. Not a lot of hand-to-hand stuff, but the space stuff is so good. You get the opening sequence. The thing I love is there's a lot of structural things in this movie, very similar to Volume 1. We opened with Quill in Volume 1 and the death of his mom. Volume 2, we open with a flashback to 37 years ago, the early meetings of Ego and Meredith, Quill's mom. And you kind of get to see that blossom. And you get to see, like, the beginnings of, even though Ego you want to buy, there's something off with him right away because he plants this thing in the ground, shows it to Meredith, and we zoom in to it to get us to our real opening sequence. And when you go into the plant, it's got like a bloodstream, which means that it's living, which means it's connected to Ego. And you kind of get that hint, and that's always there. So Ego, there's something off with Ego. But the writing's so good that you buy into, like, hey, Ego's Quill's dad, we want to see this. This beautiful, planet world that, James Gunn creates. But something's always off with them. And then you spell out of that, so there's that similarity starting in the past, coming to the present. Volume 1, Chris Pratt as that awesome dance sequence. Volume 2, It Belongs to Groot, and talk about being, creative. We have this awesome action sequence going on, and our focus is on Baby Groot. And Rocket has become someone who loves music because Quill loves music so much. He brings a boombox, and he's trying to fix the stereo, and they're like, we don't have time for this. They start fighting the creature. Baby Groot plugs in the stereo, music starts playing, and the entire scene is just following Groot around as he dances around. I clearly cannot dance as well as Groot, or I just don't look as cute doing it. But you just get to follow him dancing around, and what's awesome, the creatures that Pratt uses as a microphone in Volume 1, Baby Groot is chasing and has a little fight sequence with that. Meanwhile, in the background, you're seeing all the action. It's just slightly out of focus because it's in the background. Something happens, stereo breaks, music stops. Now everybody's back involved. But I do love that when Groot's dancing, each one of the Guardians is like, Groot, look out, get out of the way, you're going to get hurt. And then when we get into the actual action, we get to see them fighting this creature. The creature looks so cool. It's this tentacle-y kind of monster. And one of the things that he projects is this rainbow mist stuff that comes out of his mouth. So again, just building on that color palette that we had in the first one. Color pops so much in this one as well. But getting to watch the Guardians fight this thing and work as a team, really awesome, And I love that the humor's always in there, right? Gamora has guns, and Quill's I thought the guns were my thing, the sword was your thing. And when they realize that the skin of this creature is too tough, first it's Drax. He's like, I know, we can't get it from the outside. I'll go to the inside. And he jumps, and you get this really cool slow-mo sequence of him getting eaten. And then being on the inside and just going, ah, and stabbing the inside. It's hysterical. And compound that with Quill and Gamora, why did he just jump in there? He says the skin is too thick. That doesn't make any sense. The skin's going to be just as thick on the inside. Quill notices a cut for a wound. There's some kind of an opening on its neck. So him and Rocket work on getting it to look up, and Gamora goes to shoot it. Gun doesn't work, so what comes out? Her sword. She runs up, stabs it, slices it down the middle. Who pops out as the creature falls and dies? But Drax, and he thinks that he did it. And it's just... God, I love Drax so much in this movie. I love Dave Bautista. He stole Guardians 1 for me. Kind of steals Guardians 2 again because he's even funnier. He laughs a ton in this movie. Like I said, having that burden of getting the revenge with Ronan has kind of lightened up Drax a lot. And he is the humor baseline in this movie. He is just constantly making you laugh. Like I said, just seeing him stab that creature, and he's just ah! It's so perfect. It's so funny. So I love that opening sequence. I love the Sovereign chase that follows it. Like I said, just a really cool space chase sequence. It's something that Gunn is really good at. And again, something similar to the first one. We got this cool Nowhere chase sequence. When they're on Nowhere at the Collector in Volume 1. Now we get this cool chase sequence with the Sovereign. We even get to bring the Sovereign back toward the end and get to see Rocket use these lasers that just wipe them all out. And you just see all of their stuff go right across the board. Just awesome. Rocket, when he's on the planet. So after the Sovereign attack, they really do mess up the Guardian ship pretty bad. They crash land. Ego actually saves the day. During that chase sequence, you see Ego's ship and him standing on top. And Rocket's just did anyone see the little man? And they're like, you're talking about a 1-inch man? He's like, well, if he was closer, he'd probably be bigger. So Rocket's calling him little because prospectively, he's so far away, he looks like he's about this big. And he kind of wipes out the back end so that they can crash land. So when he shows up and explains who he is, Gamora kind of gives Quill a push. Hey, let's go with him. Rocket, Groot, and at this point, they've caught Nebula. Or not caught, they've exchanged Nebula. Working with the Sovereign was to get Nebula, who had been captured by the Sovereign. So they leave Nebula with Rocket and Groot. Gamora, Drax, Star-Lord go off with Ego. And you get this awesome scene on the planet where Rocket is fixing the ship, but he knows the Ravagers are hunting them actively. and he must have had an inkling. He sets up all these booby traps and is then just chilling in a tree as he watches the Ravagers come in, and he starts blowing them up. He has a gravity bomb thing that he keeps hitting, so you just see them go, they go to a wide shot after you get these really cool sequences where they're like this. You go to this wide shot, you just see one group pop up, and you see the other group pop up, and it's just a really funny action sequence for, Rocket that ends really poorly. Like, Yondu shows up, and he's kind of gonna lock down on him, and they're gonna kill him for a bounty that the Sovereign have put out on all of the Guardians. And Nebula ends up convinces Groot to let her out so she can help. She shoots Yondu, rips off his mohawk, and he goes unconscious, and that leads to a mutiny, which then leads to another great sequence. And like very much like Volume 1, all the action, built-in dialogue, built-in humor, mixed in with all of it. So you get another great scene where Yondu and Rocket are in a cage, and I love the thing that's so great about this movie. Everyone knows how cute Baby Groot is. They talk about killing Baby Groot, and they're like, no, he's too cute, you can't kill it. So they don't, and that leads Groot to get loose, and he goes and finds Rocket and Yondu's like, there's a fin in a drawer. If you go get my fin, it's a new prototype fin. You get that fin, I can get us out of here. And this leads to probably my favorite sequence in the whole movie, because it's got a great callback. If you remember in Volume 1, Rocket did the first mission out of the prison. He asked Quill to get the leg the mechanical leg of one of the people in prison just because he thinks it's funny. Recalls that later in Volume 1 when he has a plan. He's like, for my plan, I'm going to need this, and that guy's eye. And Quill's like, he doesn't really need the eye. He's just joking. And Rocket starts laughing. He's like, I'm not joking. So, Baby Groot, very unintelligent. The other thing I love is not said, but because of what happened to Groot in 1, and the way he acts in this one, we can tell that this is a different Groot. He's starting all over again. It's almost like he's been reincarnated into a creature that looks like himself. But because of that, he's kind of dumb and doesn't understand things. So they're trying to explain this fin. First he brings back Yondu's underwear. Then he brings a desk. Then he brings this and that. And one of the things he brings, Homeboy's eye. It just makes Rocket laugh. It makes you laugh. It's just this really nice, cute sequence that eventually Yondu's right-hand man, who didn't really want to start a mutiny, when he said, all you do is protect Quill, I'm tired of it. And this dude, Taserface, who Rocket makes tons of fun of in this sequence, and it's hysterical. Everyone laughs. So much so that when the ship is blowing up and he contacts the Sovereign, here's our coordinates, just make sure you tell Yondu that Taserface was the one that led him to his end, and then the Sovereign start laughing because Taserface is outrageous. But that whole sequence is super funny, and then finally when the fin does attach onto Yondu's head, and his arrow just starts taking everybody out. It's, again, building off of that sequence from Volume 1 where, it was 10 dudes in a circle, he takes them out. Well, now you got 20-something, 30-something dudes throughout this entire ship, and it's just him and Rocket and Groot walking around, and you see the arrow just taking everyone out. You get an awesome sequence where Groot finally gets a little revenge on one of the guys, and it's just takes him out. And anything Groot does is just adorable, even when he's fighting and angry. Angry Baby Groot is adorable. So love that whole sequence. Again, action mixed with all of this really good dialogue and writing. Following that escape sequence, not a whole ton of action going on Ego. We do get a little fight between Nebula and Gamora leading into the finale. And I love that, man. Again, remember, I was saying all this stuff with family. Totally forgot. The relationship and conversations between Nebula and Gamora. You really, I love that they gave Nebula so much more for this one. Because it creates something that's going to be awesome, I think, for Avengers. Is she, from Gamora's standpoint, it's you're crazy. You're just always trying to beat me. And Nebula says to her, after they have this huge sequence where they almost both kill each other, she kind of comes in with one of the ships trying to take out Gamora. They crash. Then the way it crashes, the gun comes off Gamora, starts shooting the ship. It falls through. And they have this convo, and Nebula basically says, no, you were the one that always wanted to win. Because you wanted to win, all I wanted was a sister. And instead, you always win, and, Thanos, anything that you did to me, he just started to replace me with mechanics. And you just have this heartbreaking sequence where I think they've repaired a lot of their relationship. At the end of the movie, like, Gamora gives Nebula a huge hug before Nebula goes, and she's kind of unwilling, but then by the end of that shot, she kind of hugs her. So you get that cool kind of fun sequence, but then most of the stuff that's going on Ego is just beautiful stuff, right? You have this really awesome dialogue conversations with Drax and Mantis that we talked about. Same with Gamora and Quill and Ego. That's most of what's going on there. And you're just getting all these beautiful visuals. Again, this movie, the visuals are stunning. The color palette is stunning. The CGI and practical special effects all work really well. Like I said, Gunn just takes what he did in the first one, brings it into the second one, and keeps expanding on it. Improving in spots where he can, right? Like, I think this opening was better than the Volume 1's opening. But yeah, like you have a lot of this conversation stuff, but then you finally get into the finale action sequence. And again, it's one of these really long action sequences, and it's so cool and it's so inventive. At one point, Ego and Quill are fighting each other like they're gods. They both have the power to utilize stuff from the planet. And at one point, Ego makes this giant version of him. So like you see Ego going like this, and then it's just rocks form around him and form a bigger version of him going like this. Quill does the same thing, but something that was referenced earlier in the movie, he becomes Pac-Man. Great. When all the Guardians finally show up to try to save the day, everything that's going on is cool. You love the way that they're flying around, the way they're kind of each taking out, the way they're all kind of separated. Mantis and Drax are together, Nebula and Gamora are together, and they're all trying to accomplish different things while Ego is trying to take them all out so that he can just power Quill to take over the whole planet. Now, that's also one of the things I didn't mention earlier that I didn't really like, and it's tricky because the timeline got screwed up a bit. It's the one spot that they kind of got flawed, and the plants essentially just turn into a massive blue version of the Blob. And when he taps into Quill and activates that power, it just rapidly expands, which does lead to a great sequence that involves, I believe, James Gunn's parents, who are driving the car, and they're like, oh, just like a little thing that you hear afterward, and like, oh, that's who they were. That was cool. But it's just an odd thing. Like, it's just odd that that's what's going on. Like, they're trying to save the galaxy again. And okay, but like, one of the spots that this thing breaks out at them is Earth. Pre-Avengers 2, and no Avengers show up for it. Like, no one is like alerted and like looking into what's going on. And then of course it's never referenced in Avengers 2 or anywhere else because Guardians happened after all the last times we've seen the Avengers together. One of those weird timeline things that doesn't really do it for me, but works enough to, like I said, it's just not quite executed 100% well, but works enough to kind of get the gist of why they need to save the universe and what's happening. The focus is more about Ego and less about what's really going on. So yeah, it's cool, man. Like, you get that powered up and things are going on, and they're able to all kind of separately get themselves going places. And then you get this awesome sequence that's in the trailer, where they're basically like, the only way we're going to get to blow up the brain to destroy Ego is through these caverns. We're all too big, which is funny because one of the reasons Yondu always said he kept Quill around was because he was skinny and can get into places he can't fit anywhere else. Well, now that's Baby Groot. Rocket tries to explain to him, like, look, you're going to flip this switch, then hit this button, and it'll set a 5-minute timer. Whatever you do, don't hit this button, because that'll set the bomb off immediately. And it becomes a big talking point, so much so he's like, man, like, when Groot's not getting, he's like, I am Groot, I am Groot, I am Groot. And it's like, no, and he does it like 3-4 times, and then Rocket's like, does anyone have tape? I want to put it over the death button. And it's like, you built the bomb and the detonator, why would you create the death button? It's just one of those things that's funny, because, yeah, if you were building a bomb, you would want both options, and that's just the way Rocket works. And then when he's talking to Quill, as Quill's running around, you see it worked really well in the movie because of the surround sound. Quill's like, I don't know, I'll check with everybody, I'll be right back. And he disappears, and you just hear his voice yelling. And Rocket's like, I can't believe nobody has, tape. It's like, if all the people that have tape, you build stuff out of nowhere, you would be the guy. He's like, yeah, I know, I've got to do everything. And then he turns, and Groot's gone, and he's running off. He's like, uh-oh, that's bad. And it's just this really funny sequence that eventually Groot does correctly, and he does set off the bomb with the ticker. He comes running back out, and it's this, them then trying to get out, and like Quill basically says to everybody, "Get out of here. You go save yourselves. I'm gonna keep taking out Ego, but I want you guys to get out, and I'll be behind you." And they realize that that's not gonna happen, and this leads to the most emotional, heartbreaking sequence of the movie, where Yondu is up on the ship and he goes to Rocky. He's like, "I'm gonna go get Quill. It's my turn for redemption. Tell me you got some." He's like, "I only got one rocket pack and one oxygen thing." The oxygen thing you throw it on kind of looks like bubble wrap, covers the whole person, but it keeps them breathing oxygen when you're out in space. So you know right away that Yondu is now going to do what Quill did for Gamora, only no one's going to save Yondu. And it's heartbreaking, man. And the heartbreak starts right when he says, Ego might be your father, but he ain't your daddy. And right there, you're just like, oh, it's coming. But I love Yondu's entrance. Him and Quill kind of come down together, and Yondu's holding onto his arrow to float down onto the planet. And, Quill calls him Mary Poppins, and Yondu doesn't know Mary Poppins because it's an Earth reference, and he's like, "Who's Mary Poppins? Was he cool?" And Quill's just like, "Hell yeah, he was cool, man." And Rooker's just like, "All right, like, I'm Mary Poppins, y'all," and it's just so funny. And then when they're leaving the planet, when he's Quill, the bomb has gone off. Ego is dying. The human version of him is dissipated into the planet. They got to get out of there. Rooker just grabs Quill, shoots up, snaps the thing on him, and Quill's like, "No." And again, I didn't mention it, but when Quill does this for Gamora, the way they kind of freeze and you see it build on their faces, you start seeing that happen with Yondu, and Quill realizes what's going on. He's trying to get the oxygen off. He'd rather save Yondu, and he can't, and he's just like, "No, no." And Yondu dies. He sacrifices himself for his son. Not his real son, but the kid he always looked at as his son. And it's so emotional, man. I mean, I'm not getting choked up talking about it. I sob every time it happens. And when you watch it the second or third time and you know it's coming, it's even more emotionally gut-wrenching. And then that finale sequence then leads to one of the most gorgeous things you've seen on the screen from Marvel. The funeral for Yondu. Rocket called up all the Ravagers, told him what he did, and that's enough for the Ravagers to give him redemption. And they all show up and give him a Ravager funeral, and it's gorgeous, man. You got these fireworks going off. Yondu kind of, as he goes through this flaming thing, kind of starts to turn to this red sparkly ash, and that turns into his arrow. Oh my god! Like, James Gunn, you know how to punch someone in the stomach, man. It's just the most beautiful sequence. The little eulogy that Quill gives is wonderful, and watching all of them, and that's where you end. I read an article just recently about how The Rock almost quit Rampage because the movie was going to end on a sad note, and he doesn't like his movies to end on a sad note. Well, here's a movie, man, that ends on a sad note. I mean, the funeral is the last thing we see until we get to the mid and post-credit stuff. And it's emotionally gut-wrenching, but it's so beautiful, and the payoff is so huge. It's what makes a really, really quality movie. When you can take a group, of audience members to that emotional place in a movie that you don't expect it to show up, it just creates something really beautiful. Again, anything that's non-action in this movie that I've mentioned, visuals, the storytelling, it just all works so well. And the thing that makes Guardians 2 so great is that Gunn didn't try to outdo himself. He didn't try to make a better movie. He understood Guardians is a special movie. It came out of nowhere. No one was expecting what we got, and I think Gunn understood that, so he didn't try to do too much. That's the trap with sequels. Sometimes you try to do too much so you can outdo the success of the first one. And instead of doing that, Gunn just continues to build. And yeah, there's a little bit of a gap somewhere. A couple weeks have probably gone by where from the end of 1, the start of 2, small gap. But you can literally watch these movies back to back, like I did, which is why you've gotten your reviews both on the same day, back to back, because it works that well. And Gunn, it's just an extent. For me, this is more of an extension of Volume 1 and just building on stuff that Gunn achieved so well. So I love this movie, man. It's not gonna be. It's like The Hangover, right? Hangover 2 was never gonna be good as Hangover 1 because Hangover 1 came out of nowhere. Now Hangover 2 is basically just Hangover 1 redone. Guardians isn't that. Guardians is a different movie, but it does do lots of similar things. It has a very similar structure to one. And I've said this about both movies. If one didn't exist, two would have been just as big and popular as one was. That's how good these films were. Guardians specifically, even more so than The Hangover. So that's all I gotta say, man. I love anything that has to do with the Guardians. Can't wait to see them in Avengers Infinity War and join up with all of our other Avengers. So now it's your turn. Hit those comments. Tell me what you thought of Guardians Volume 2, what you liked, what you didn't. Did you sob at the end of the movie like your man, the Seaman? Did you like the emotional stuff that hits in this movie, or would you have just preferred it to be an action comedy like Thor Ragnarok? And we'll talk about emotion and comedy when we get to Thor Ragnarok, because it's something that I think Guardians does a little bit better, and I really appreciate the emotional heartbeat in this movie. So hit those comments, let me know everything you think. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, and as always, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, followed by the little bell so you get alerts every time I make a new video, including the next installment of the Avengers Infinity War Countdown, or rather, the Seaman's Infinity War Countdown. As we continue, we are now just about, technically, 3:48 in the morning. We're a week away. We're 7 days out now, so we are vastly, quickly approaching Avengers Infinity War. I cannot wait. I can't wait to get through the rest of the films, talking with you guys. So until next time, for the Seaman's Cinema Sit-Down, I am the Seaman. I'm signing off. Peace!